In a mansion dripping with wealth and luxury there lived a billionaire, and his wife a woman known not for her charm, but for her impossible nature. She was feared by every maid who dared to work under her roof, and one by one, they all walked away broken and defeated. No one could endure her endless demands, her sharp tongue, and her cruel games. But one day a new maid arrived. She was different, quiet, resilient, and full of strength that came not from money, but from her spirit. What no one knew then was that this woman would do what no other could. She would face the billionaire's wife, endure every test, and change the household forever. This is the story of the maid who did the impossible. When Grace first stepped through the grand doors of the billionaire's mansion, the air itself seemed to shift. She was not like the others, who had come before her timid, anxious, and ready to crumble under the weight of the billionaire's wife's impossible demands. Grace carried herself with quiet dignity, her eyes calm yet firm, and her steps steady despite the whispers of failure that lingered in the halls. The staff exchanged doubtful glances, for they had seen too many maids walk in with hope only to leave in tears. But Grace's presence was different. There was a strength about her born not from wealth or privilege, but from hardship and resilience. She greeted the household with humility, bowing her head respectfully, but inside, she promised herself she would not be broken. Little did anyone know this soft-spoken woman was about to face challenges fiercer than they imagined, and in doing so she would prove that sometimes true power lies in patience, courage, and heart. The moment Grace began her duties, the billionaire's wife wasted no time in unleashing her infamous cruelty. Every task was turned into a battlefield, every instruction a trap designed to break her spirit. She demanded meals prepared with impossible precision, only to criticize them harshly. She sent Grace on errands meant to exhaust her, timed her chores to the second, and raised her voice at the slightest mistake. For any other maid, this was the fire that burned them out, leaving them humiliated and defeated. But Grace faced it all with unshaken calm. Her hands never trembled, her eyes never wavered. She answered insults with quiet respect, and handled impossible tasks with patience and steady determination. Where others had faltered, Grace endured, walking through the flames of anger without losing herself. And though the wife seethed with frustration, somewhere deep inside a spark of admiration began to flicker, for Grace was proving that her spirit could not be bent or broken. The billionaire had watched countless maids come and go, each one fleeing under the weight of his wife's wrath. He had grown used to the cycle: hope, failure, departure. But Grace was different, and slowly he began to notice. At first, it was subtle, the way she carried out every task with precision, the way she responded to cruelty without bitterness, the way she treated every member of the household with quiet kindness. Unlike the others, she did not complain, nor did she cower. Instead, she worked with a strength that came from within. One evening, as he passed through the grand dining hall, he saw Grace kneeling to clean a spill, while his wife berated her harshly. Yet Grace did not falter. She simply lifted her head and answered with humility, her dignity untouched. For the first time, the billionaire found himself questioning not the maid but his wife's cruelty. He realized there was something remarkable about Grace, something that set her apart from all the rest. A seed of respect began to take root, and with it a curiosity that would soon change everything. Margaret, the billionaire's wife, had grown increasingly restless as she noticed her husband's subtle change of focus. His eyes lingered a moment too long when Grace passed by, his tone softened ever so slightly when he spoke of her work. To Margaret this was intolerable. Her pride would not allow a mere maid, especially one she deemed beneath her, to command such silent admiration. Fueled by jealousy and arrogance, she devised a cruel plot to humiliate Grace and drive her out once and for all. She ordered Grace to host an extravagant dinner for distinguished guests, a task far beyond the capacity of one person, especially with the unrealistic deadline Margaret set. Behind the scenes, she sabotaged Grace's efforts, misplacing ingredients, giving contradictory instructions, and ensuring every moment was a trap waiting to spring. In Margaret's mind, this would finally expose Grace as a failure, shatter her dignity, and remind the entire household that no one could survive her wrath. Little did she know, however, that this very plot would become the stage where Grace's resilience would shine brighter than ever. The night of the grand dinner arrived and tension filled the mansion like a storm about to break. Margaret smirked confidently, certain her cruel plan would bring Grace's downfall. The kitchen was a battlefield, missing ingredients, broken utensils, and constant interruptions orchestrated to overwhelm her. Yet Grace refused to bend. With steady hands and calm resolve, she improvised, adapting to every challenge with resourcefulness and quiet strength. When flour ran out, she found another way. When servants were pulled away, she worked twice as hard. Each obstacle only seemed to sharpen her focus. And as the guests arrived expecting perfection, Grace served a flawless meal that left the room in awe. The dishes were not just food, they were a reflection of her patience, endurance, and unyielding spirit. Margaret seethed in silent rage, but Grace stood tall, her dignity intact. She had not only survived the trap, she had transformed it into a moment of victory, proving that no cruelty could extinguish her inner light. Margaret had always carried herself with an air of superiority, her power unquestioned within the walls of the mansion. But after Grace's quiet triumph at the dinner, tiny fractures began to show in the icy mask she wore. Though she still barked orders and held her chin high, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had set a trap designed to humiliate, yet Grace's calm strength turned it into a display of resilience that even the guests whispered about with admiration. For the first time, Margaret felt her control slipping. The servants no longer looked at her with fear alone, some now glanced toward Grace with respect, even hope. Her husband's silence stung the most, for it spoke volumes louder than words. Though she tried to cover her insecurity with harsher commands and bitter glares, deep down Margaret knew that Grace had unsettled the careful balance of her authority. And once a crack appears in the armor of pride, it is only a matter of time before the whole facade begins to crumble. The household had grown tense, every day heavier than the last, as Margaret's cruelty sharpened in desperation. She lashed out not only at Grace, but at anyone who dared to show her the slightest kindness. Yet the turning point came one evening when Margaret, in a fit of rage, openly accused Grace of overstepping her place. Her voice echoed through the grand hall, dripping with venom, as she tried to strip Grace of the dignity she had so carefully preserved. But this time her husband was watching, not with silent disapproval, but with eyes filled with resolve. The sight of Grace standing calmly, refusing to shrink despite Margaret's fury, became unbearable for him. The room froze as he finally raised his voice, defending Grace against his wife's cruelty in front of everyone. Margaret's face burned with shock. Her authority, long taken for granted, was unraveling before her very eyes. That moment marked the breaking point where cruelty could no longer silence compassion, and where truth once spoken aloud could never be buried again. What no one thought possible finally unfolded inside that mansion. For years Margaret had driven away every maid with her coldness and cruelty, yet Grace had endured every trial with unshakable dignity. And now, in the very moment Margaret sought to break her, something extraordinary occurred. Grace won not only the respect of the staff, but also the heart of the household itself. The servants, once fearful and silent, began to stand behind her, subtly defying Margaret's tyranny. The billionaire himself, long a passive observer, openly acknowledged Grace's courage, praising her strength in front of his wife. Margaret, speechless, for the first time realized her control had slipped through her fingers. The impossible was not just Grace surviving where others had failed, but Grace transforming the atmosphere of the entire home, turning a place of fear into one touched by respect, hope, and quiet unity. Against all odds, the maid, who was never meant to last, had achieved what no one before her could. She had changed everything. Long after the storm inside the mansion had passed, Grace's presence continued to echo through its halls. She had not only endured but transformed an environment once poisoned by arrogance and cruelty. The servants now carried themselves with quiet confidence, inspired by her unshakable dignity. The billionaire, forever changed by her resilience, began to treat those around him with deeper respect, realizing that true wealth lies not in money but in character. Even Margaret, though she resisted at first, could not escape the lesson Grace had left behind. Her cruelty had not defeated Grace, but had only revealed her own weakness. In the community, stories of Grace's courage spread, turning her from a simple maid into a symbol of perseverance and strength. Her legacy was not just about surviving the impossible, but proving that kindness, humility, and inner strength can dismantle even the hardest walls of pride. Grace had left more than an impression. She had left a mark that no power or wealth could erase. And so Grace's journey reminds us all that true strength is not found in wealth, status, or power, but in the courage to remain kind when faced with cruelty, and in the will to stand tall when the world tries to break you. The billionaire's mansion may have been the stage, but the lesson stretches far beyond its walls. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy respect, compassion, or resilience. Grace proved that the impossible can happen when dignity meets determination. Her story is a reminder that even in the darkest places, one light can change everything.